I'm Professor Thuli Madonsela, Chair of Social Justice Research at Stellenbosch University. Today I'll be speaking about human rights in our fractured world. What can business do? I thought I would talk about human rights in a fractured world at a time when we're all very hopeful, at least in this country. We are extremely hopeful at this stage. But you'll agree with me that within this whole hope setup, there's a bit of uncertainty. And an issue of uncertainty is confiscation of land, or not confiscation, expropriation of land without pay. And of course, it has raised a lot of uncertainty. So there's one group that is hopeful. We get land, and we have 57 million South Africans. Then there are those who are uncertain about what's going to happen to my shares. You know, the company that I've invested in has some shares in some farms. Will they be confiscated without, will they be expropriated without pay? So that's human rights. Human rights, as you already have got in a sense, is a balancing act. It has always been one of those things about creating peace. Smart leaders thought, let's come up with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And they tried to cover all bases, from basic rights such as freedom, human dignity, to socio-economic rights such as a right to food, right to housing, and everything else. Quite interestingly, though, is that despite the Universal Declaration of Human Rights covering all of the rights, which are similar to the rights in our Constitution, the world eventually decided to forget socio-economic rights and focused on what we refer to as civil and political rights. But we've now found that, for example, just the right to movement means somebody has to give you a passport, and it costs. So civil and political rights don't come free, but that was the thinking there. All of those things that the architects of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights had thought about remained problems and continued to create fracture in the world. Recently, I addressed Stellenbosch students. One of the stories I told them was Spencer Johnson's story, Who Moved My Cheese? So I told them the story with a view to talking about the difference between successful people and unsuccessful people, that the ones that are successful are the ones that react to disruption as leaders, and then those that react by feeling victims like victims. As you know, with Spencer Johnson, Who Moved My Cheese, are those mice that find cheese. They don't even know who put it there, but it's their cheese. They eat it because they found it there, and eventually they become extremely comfortable. Some even build little castles, little homes, as we all do, isn't it? Build lovely homes next to our cheese. But one day, cheese is gone. So there's two reactions, according to Spencer Johnson. It's the mice that complain, who moved my cheese? And they complain, they analyze who moved it, how it started, etc. But they do nothing, and in the end, they stay cheeseless. And then there's a mice that realize the cheese is moved, and they go look for other cheeses. And of course, they thrive, which is what happens in society when people move our cheese every day. Some respond as victims, some respond as leaders. Anyway, one young person comes to me during the question time and asks, now that you're not public protector, as public protector, your cheese was, you had a good job, money, security, and all of these good things that go with being in high office. But would you serve society and do similar things if there was no cheese? My answer was very spontaneous. It was immediate. I said, no. You should have seen the bodies of the young people. It was like I had just taken their cheese again. how could she? See, she's a mercenary, I suppose. I think that was the stuff in their own head. I mean, I explained to the young people that what's the cheese for me? Cheese is not always money, but there has to be something in you that gets a reward. And for me, it's the applause within. For example, as pop potato, what was the applause within? What was the cheese for me? It wasn't the fact that I get paid. I would have been paid even if I didn't really pursue the cases. It was being able to look myself in the mirror at night and recognize this human being and say, I like you. But that brings us to business. You business people, and at least we've established one principle about, as business people, you establish a business for a reason. Whether you're establishing a business, a social enterprise, as Louis van Rijn in front of us here, or you establish a business for profit, there's something in it for you. So what's the cheese for business in human rights? I thought a poem written in the 1960s is what really makes sense to business people. At least when I've told the story, a lot of business people have understood what I'm talking about. Titles The Cold Within. It's about 6 persons who happen to be together. And he just says they're trapped by happenstance. It's a dark night. It's a very cold night, bitter cold night. Each of the 6 people has a stick of wood or a log in their hand. And the fire is dying, and it needs pieces of wood to keep it going. And the first person looks around and sees somebody who's not from their church, and I don't want them to benefit from my log, they keep it. The next one is poor. Sees a rich person and says, a filthy rich, he's not going to have my log, keeps it. The rich person looks around, sees the poor person, he thinks, the lazy poor, they're not going to get my log, he keeps it. The one person sees somebody from a different race or different color to him, he says, this person doesn't look like me, they can't get my log, keeps it. The other person looks around and sees people who have been historically advantaged. The ones who have always had the land. It's like, no, they can't have my log as well. So he keeps it. The last man, we can refer to him as a mercenary. The one who never does anything but for gain, decides, these sorry people are not going to pay me, I'm not going to give them my log. James Patrick Kinney ends the poem with words to this effect. They did not die from the cold without, they died from the cold within. So in our fractured world today, what fire is dying and what log is in my hand? What log is in your hand? So we have a fractured world. So our peace is the flame that is dying. And with it is also democracies, because when there's severe conflict, democracy is threatened, the institutions become fragile, the whole state gravitates towards fragility, and eventually everything could degenerate into either autocracy, as we've seen in Turkey, or total anarchy, as we've seen in some of the Arab states. So that's what's at stake for us in business world. Basically, what we have in the world today is a world that is fractured, but it's primarily fractured because there are left behind people among us. In South Africa, let's take the story of Balisa. Balisa on June 16, she came to one of our conferences. At the podium, Balisa said, we fought for freedom and we never got it. We got democracy instead. And she said, I'm not free. My daughter is not free. In the past, it was the past law that stopped me from being free, from experiencing my true potential and going wherever I wanted. But today, poverty is the new path. Palesa is the reason we have peace in South Africa today, or at least relative peace. She is the reason today we talk about being on the pedestal of hope, which might not, of course, be a summit, but it has taken us somewhere. Because Palesa, at the age of 13, was arrested on June 16 and kept in prison for months, which then arrested her development, and she couldn't continue with school. So because she fought for freedom, she couldn't get the privileges that I got to eventually become a full-time law commissioner, a constitution drafter, and the public protector. So she's almost like a signpost that stood there and pointed the way to freedom, but stayed behind. So she's part of the left behind in the entire world. And for her, whilst we see the pedestal of hope, she sees a constitutional promise betrayed. Palesa is one of many in South Africa, in the world, who have been promised by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that all humans are born equal. And who has been promised by the Vienna Declaration that all human rights are important, that human rights are indivisible, that no right is more important than the other. But there she is, because of socioeconomic constraints, she can't move forward. But it's not just affecting her. Her daughter now passed matric, but we know that there are limited spaces at university. So Palesa and her daughter are captured in the cycle of poverty. So what can business do about that promise betrayed? UN Global Compact gives us the answer. It's a case where Kofi Annan brought the business world, the governments and others, and said, we are in the same boat. And if the boat has cracks, it might fall on the one side, but eventually we're all going to go down. So why don't we join together and fix our boat, planet Earth? And the UN Global Compact was born, and it has 10 principles. 2 of those principles are about human rights. For businesses, the first part of human rights is to avoid yourself undermining human rights. And where would you undermine human rights? In 3 areas. The first one is your own staff, just discrimination. The second part is customers. We don't always think that treatment of customers is a human rights issue. What is listeria right now? Human rights, somebody's going to die because somebody didn't pay attention. Another encouraging trend, if you look at the thing there, it's World Social Justice Day. There's a global movement that is looking at 20th of February throughout the world to bring everyone now together. UN Global Compact, Sustainable Development Goals, African Charter on Human and People's Rights, Agenda 2063, NDP, everything together to look at this day, how do we connect the lights? What is the future, just in ending? For me, for business specific, I would say the starting point is the UN Global Compact, to make sure that they become part of it, to make sure that in South Africa we have vibrant chapters of the UN Global Compact. The other place is to make sure that everyone is aware of sustainable development goals. They came from an understanding that for global peace to be sustained, development will have to carry everyone on board. And for development to be sustainable, we have to look after the environment, we have to look after communities, we have to pull everything together. What do I mean specifically is that when you make a decision, always calibrate society to see who is sitting where and how will this neutral policy, this neutral law, impact differently on people who are differently situated? So firstly, just as business, it's no longer about just making money, it's about serving humanity and being rewarded fairly for it. And social enterprise is one way of serving humanity. And what can businesses do support social enterprise, support community. So social accountability is about leveraging data and information within communities to make sure that we know the truth, and that we can do working with governments. So that's basically what I think is the future. Again, thank you for your interest in human rights, and thank you for what you're already doing in human rights. You will agree with me that we all have a log to keep the flame of democracy alive, to keep the flame of peace alive. And that log is advancing human rights, that log is advancing social justice. And I'm certain you are doing that. It's a question of scaling what we're doing, and it's a question of connecting the lights. Thank you.